Hi, everyone. This is Lillie, and welcome to Recovery is Possible. And with me is Mike.
Hey, everybody.
So today, Mike and I decided to do a topic about what is the difference between a problem drinker versus an alcoholic. And during the course of this episode, I'm going to be basically asking Michael three questions. The first one is, Mike, when did you first start to wonder whether or not you were a problem drinker versus an alcoholic and what's involved with all of that? And it took us a while, I think, between both of us to figure that out. And so based on that, kind of talk about what was that relationship, that turmoil that existed between you and I as a result of, because I think I knew about it first before you did. And there was these roles and this dance that you and I proceeded to play for several years. And so talk about that a little bit. And then finally, whether or not either early on in recovery or even where we are now after 13 years of sobriety, which you've achieved, is what are those healthy boundaries that should or can exist between, couples?
Yeah, so the first question is, when did I know that I was going from problem drinking to alcoholism? I think it's hard to put a date on that because one thing that you have to understand about addiction is that it is progressive. It's primary, chronic, progressive, deadly. Primary, chronic, progressive, deadly. And what that means is that it starts out at a certain point. Without getting into too much of the science tonight, there's a definite genetic predisposition. Then you put social factors into it, and those combine into the progression of this addiction. But there's a definite genetic predisposition to it. Now, you add into that the cultural aspect. So in my particular case, those of you that know my story, if you've ever heard it, and it's you can find it out there online where I've talked about the entire story. I grew up in an environment where alcohol was normal. It was just normalized. I come from a very Scottish German background. I grew up in an area of Florida which had a lot of World War II veterans, people that grew up during the Great Depression, the Second World War, Korea, Vietnam, and just being in that environment, alcohol was just normalized from a very young age. I mean, to me, everybody drank a lot, and that was normal. I mean, in high school, I would drink to levels staggering levels that I thought was normal at the time, but I later realized it wasn't. So when you ask me, when did I realize it? Well, I realize that alcohol was a problem at a very young age, but I didn't know that because everybody around me drank to that point. Now, the thing is that as time goes on and you get out of that environment and you're kind of exposed to the rest of the world and the way other people do things, it's only through those experiences later that you realize not everybody drinks. Not everybody drinks like that. And then it becomes a problem because it gets worse and worse over a period of time. And if you're listening, you need to understand that your addiction gets worse over a period of time. It never gets better, and there are no exceptions, and you will not be the first exception to that. So it starts off in that environment where it's normalized, and it's when I drank, it was to very large amounts, but it's not all the time. You're able to get by. I mean, obviously, I had the career I had, so I had some modicum of success. But then later, because it progresses, then it starts to take over. Then it becomes a problem. Okay? So that's a very simplistic answer to a very complicated question.
Well, let me ask you, because you said, like I asked you the first question, when did you notice that it was a problem? So your upbringing and my upbringing are very different. And I like to kind of personalize it, not in a general sense. So growing up, when I was growing up, even my father having a rum and Coke would make my mother very upset. Mm-hmm. So there was very, very little alcohol in the home. Now, when you say in your family that it was a lot of drinking, you consider it normal, I do remember when we were in college, even when we first dated, like you would say, oh, I went with my roommate and we started out with some beers and then I had like 9 tequila shots. I'm like, wow, that's a lot. Now, Of course, when you came over to my place, you were very, very drunk. And then even while we were in college, you always kept like a 6-pack in the back of the car, right, in the trunk, or you'd pull over and then grab it. And I'd be like, it was very, very clear to me very, very early on. I'm thinking, wow, this guy doesn't just drink a little bit. He drinks a lot. So when you say it was normal, you had mentioned to me when you were younger, you'd go around to your parents had parties, and you'd go around, I don't know how old you were, you'd go around and drink, a little bit of alcohol from everyone's drinks. Mm-hmm. So when you say normal, to you, it was normal, but your concept of alcoholism wasn't an awareness that you had, right? You were way too young to understand that
No,
concept.
because if everybody around you is drinking that way, then why would that feel abnormal to you? Why would that be abnormal to you? Mm-hmm. And I went to the University of Florida, so I went to college, which was known. It was known as a party college. They would brag about it being a party college. My brother would talk about it, and it was just, that was one of the things. They took pride in the fact that it was a hard partying school. So I went from that high school environment to a college environment, and then into the military, which, let's be honest, has a drinking culture. Why would I have thought at the time that it was abnormal? Why would I have thought that?
Well, that's true. But I mean, I think even from my standards, comparing you to other people, even to whom we were hanging out with, I thought it was pretty advanced.
Well, I think, okay, so what happens here is, this is where the social dynamic comes in. Remember, you have genetic predisposition, mm-hmm. but then you have the social part of it, like the social and lifestyle, factors. So I came from an environment where that was normal. So if you think about it, now I'm telling you my perspective at that time. I have a very different perspective of it now. But if you think about it, when I went to school and I sought out the people that were that way. If you think about it, I would not have been hanging around people like you because you didn't party. I was looking for the people that were partying because I had heard that this was a big party school. I'm already looking for the people who are partying at school. So that's who I'm associating with. And so my perception of my world in college was everybody's doing what I'm doing. And I remember when our daughter was at Virginia Tech, I remember walking, and I'm in sobriety at this point, years of sobriety. And I remember walking around, it was either a Friday or a Saturday night, which when I was in college, we would have been, really into the partying by that point. And I remember walking around and we see out on the lawn kids with laptops and they're drinking coffee and they're sitting around, no alcohol anywhere. And I remember turning to you and I said, wow, college kids have really changed. They're so different than when we were in college. And you asked me, well, what do you mean? What do you mean that they're different now? And I said, well, back when we were in college, everybody was partying. Look at these kids drinking coffee. Are you kidding me? On a Saturday night, I would have been in the middle of a party. And I remember you turning to me and you saying, no, this is exactly how it was when we were in college. It's just that you were drinking all the time. Not everybody else was. But again, that shows you that I wouldn't have noticed that because I was focusing on the kids that were partying. And I'm sure when we were at Virginia Tech that weekend, there were kids that were partying. But then there were kids that were studying and that were out on the lawn on their laptops and drinking coffee. They were probably like that at the University of Florida, too, in the 1980s. I just never noticed them, if that makes sense. So it was really a perspective shift, over the years. I can look back now, but keep in mind, I didn't know then what I know now. You didn't know then what you know now. It's a very, very different perspective. And I don't know that the drinking is any more or less now than it was then. I will tell you today, though, they do have things that we did not have, and that's fentanyl and some of the, Adderall. I didn't know anybody do it. Back then, if you had exams, typical college kids trying to get amped up for exams, people, I remember the big thing was like caffeine pills. You would, I can't remember the name of the pills that we would take, but it was basically caffeine pills. Well, they're taking Adderall now, and they're taking fentanyl, and they're taking, I guess in some ways it's a lot more dangerous now, but we're talking alcohol at this point, but I don't know that it's any worse. It's just that my perception of it was skewed.
So having said that, I think that, like I mentioned earlier, because I didn't grow up in an alcoholic home, I was much more perceptive on, wait a minute, you're drinking a little bit more than the average guy, especially after now, of course, we graduate from college, and then now you're in, we're in the Navy now, right? But I'm still stuck with the same one beer that I always have.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, you made a very good point. You're seeking out being around other people that are normalizing what you're doing. But yet I'm already starting to think, wow, you're way beyond, but not necessarily complaining about it because, excuse me, you're still functioning but I'm not even putting two and two because I didn't know anything about alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
It was only really, I would say in from my perspective is when you were a DC police officer and you're working mid shifts and then we've got our little son and then I'm like noticing wine stains, like, and then I realize, oh, you've got a glass of wine while you're holding the little infant and you're dropping your wine while you're carrying him, right? And around that time, Mom was visiting us, and I'm driving her to the liquor store every 2 or 3 days, and she's buying a liter's worth of vodka, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, wow, your mother is really drinking a lot. So our focus at the time was really on your mom. And since you were still what I would consider functioning, even though I knew that you were a heavy drinker, I didn't put two and two and even envision that you were an actual alcoholic. So we talked about in other episodes that we knew that your mother was an alcoholic, right? And then we already know where you are right now. When did you start to recognize, because I think there's an element, of course, that the alcohol hijacks your brain to tell you that you don't have it. But then where was the turning point for you where maybe you're telling me you don't think it's a problem, but maybe secretly you're thinking, I think I have a problem. When did that start occurring with you?
I think kind of after that time that you were talking about when I was in the police department. Now, let me back up a little bit. It's progressive, right? So it gets worse. Wherever you start, your addiction is going to take over, and it's going to go on an upward trajectory. And remember, it's going to get worse over a period of time. It's never going to get better. And this does not happen when we're talking alcohol. It doesn't happen overnight. Now, if you're using opiates and fentanyl, things like that, it's going to be a very, very, very steep curve. It's going to be what may take months or years with alcohol will take weeks with synthetic opiates and other things. But again, we're talking about alcohol here. So this, it's kind of like the boiling frog type of scenario where, you're in the water, and then before you know it, you're boiling to death. But you don't. Now, if you jumped into the boiling water, you would know, my gosh, I'm boiling to death, right? But because it just gets, the heat goes up little by little by little by little. One day you wake up and you're like, holy crap, how did I get here? Well, that's kind of the way drinking was. That's the way that it was with me. Again, you're not really thinking that this is abnormal. And I'm going to add in another little caveat to this. Remember, I went to a party school. I went into the Navy. I went into naval aviation. All of those environments, alcohol is normalized. Now, I got out of the Navy in 1996. I don't know what it's like now, but from talking to people that have been in the military recently, I don't know that it's entirely different. Drinking is normalized. I became a police officer. Drinking is normalized. I became an FBI agent. Drinking is normalized. So if you think about it, my lifestyle growing up in high school, and then even in my professional career, I was in a careers where alcohol was actually part of that. If you had a bad day, the older guys would say, go drink. You have a big event that happens at work, we drink. We have a celebration, we drink. We have a funeral, we drink. We drink because it's a Friday. We drink because it's a Monday. We just drink all the time, and it is still that way. I got to tell you, I'm in a profession now where I know I work at a detox unit, so obviously we don't promote alcohol. But I mean, the hospital in general, I got to tell you, it is not normalized. It is absolutely not normalized. They aren't doing happy hours at the hospital. They don't bring in alcohol to the celebrations. They don't do that at all. But you have to understand, I wasn't in that type of profession. And maybe if you're a listener, maybe you work in an environment where this is not normalized. But understand, I was in that environment. Now, keeping that in mind, remember you're deploying. There's no alcohol in Navy ships, or, and I think in the other branches of the service, when you're deploying and you're out like if you're in the Army, you're out in the field, there's no alcohol. So there's actually those forced periods where there's no alcohol. Now, so I think that kind of gives you a false sense of security. It wouldn't have occurred to me that I was alcoholic, because how do you go on a 6-month deployment? How do you go on a 3-week training exercise? How do you fly every day? Remember, in the military, there's this, back in those days, it was an 8-hour bottle to throttle. It's even longer than that now, but at the time, that's what it was. And so I could stop drinking, follow the rules and the regulations, and then go fly. And then we go on deployment, and you wouldn't drink unless you pulled into a port. So I'm thinking I can do that and comply to that. So alcoholics drink every day, right? That's what I thought. That's actually not true, but that's what I thought. So it wouldn't have occurred to me that this was literally a problem. So the question was, when did I start realizing it was a problem? So we go to Iceland. You and I are stationed in Iceland, but that was a non-flying tour for me. Remember, I followed all the guidelines and the rules for flying, but now I'm on a staff tour, and I'm not flying every day, so those rules don't apply. Then that's when the drinking became more frequent. Not necessarily every day, but certainly more frequent than it was. Then when I get out of the Navy, I go into the police department. Now, for those of you that don't know my background and don't know anything about me, I was a police officer in Washington, D.C. I was with the Washington Metropolitan Police Department. Very high stress. At the time that I worked there, it was considered one of the most dangerous police departments to work in the country. Maybe the world, actually. I mean, it was really high stress. It was really odd hours, working nights, working weekends. And, it's one man with a gun call with another man with a gun call. And, you think about it. If you had to go respond to a man with a gun, what would that do to your system, your neuropathic system? Imagine the stress that puts on your system. And if you experience that in one day, like I used to say this all the time, one day in the police department would put your average person in therapy for the rest of their life with the stuff that we saw and we did every day. But we did that every day. And so I noticed that my drinking started to increase, because when you have this 100%, it's like a 100% adrenaline dump every single day. Your body's not designed to have a 100% adrenaline dump really ever, but you're having this every day. So how do you, it's not like you go home and say, okay, I had this day where I'm chasing people with guns, I'm chasing people with knives, I've had people try to run me over with cars, I've had people shoot at me. It's not like you go home and just turn that off and go to bed. And by the way, it's very odd sleeping hours. It's not even normal sleeping hours. And it's not like you go turn that off. So how do you turn it off? Well, to me, alcohol was helpful. For you first responders out there, you know what I'm talking about. People even tell you that's a good way to have a couple of drinks. That'll turn you up. They train you to do this. At least they did back then. But it's progressive. It takes over. It starts getting worse and worse and worse. So I go from there, I go into the FBI, but it starts to progress. And then I think for me, that's when it started, the seeds were starting to be planted in the back of my mind. This was a problematic thing. Because in the police department, I didn't really look at it as a problem. Later, I did. Why? Because you're older, you have kids now, you have responsibilities, frequency and volume is starting to increase. And to be honest, and I don't want anything I'm about to say to be construed as I'm bad-mouthing the agency that I worked for, or, it's not, I know now that it's not they were the problem. There were problems, but what I'm saying is my reaction to what was going on, that's my responsibility. But the bottom line is that I went from being in a very stressful environment because of the dangers of the job to now I'm just very unhappy because I was really unhappy with the organization that I worked for. I was unhappy with things that I was seeing. I was really seeing a lot of things that bothered me, but in different ways than the police department was going on. And I had a lot of resentments towards people that I was working with and for. And that went on for like over 20 years. I mean, that was like my entire career. I was just never happy with the organization. I saw a lot of corruption. I saw a lot of things. And that's not the purpose of this podcast. What's important to understand is I was unhappy. Okay, had a lot of resentments. And if you've listened to this podcast before and you've heard me talk about this, resentments are the number one killer of addicts. Like, I'm mad at you, so I drink at you because I'm mad. I don't like you, so I drink at you because I don't like you. I'm unhappy because I drink. There's this depression that sets in, and we think that our depression is fixed by drinking. But the problem is alcohol is a depressant. So you're depressed, and you're putting a depressant on top of the depression, hoping to not be depressed. It makes no sense at all, right? But again, I realize this now, but at the time, this was not at the front of the way that I was thinking. But because it was a constant sort of depressed, resentful state that I had for a very long, basically my career, and it had its own stressors in its own way. I mean, it's a heavy load. The work that I had was a real heavy load, but it just started to progress. And somewhere in there, and I can't put a date on it, but there was a point, probably around the time that you suggested that I go to AA meetings. By the time you suggested that I go to AA meetings, in my mind, I knew this was a problem. I knew then it was a problem. But I will tell you this, though. I had a complete, and we'll probably get into it. It's like I knew it was a problem, but I didn't really understand. I know so much more about the problem now than I did then. I was very ill-equipped to deal with it.
So, Mike, are you saying that... Because we haven't even gotten to the point of being an alcoholic. You're saying that around the time that I mentioned before that, hey, you need to go to AA meeting,
Mm-hmm.
you're acknowledging that you have a problem. So are you saying that at that point you realized, okay, I might be a problem drinker, but I'm by no means an alcoholic?
No, I actually will take issue with that. I think that I knew it. And I'm going to say this too, one other thing. I think that genetically, I think it's there all along. Remember, it's progressive, primary, chronic,
right,
progressive, deadly. So the alcoholism part of it was always there. It just hadn't developed to the problem where it was manifested as a problem.
Well, one of my first question was, how do you know if you're a problem drinker versus an alcoholic? Because there are a lot of people who drink, and I think that some of the stats I was reading was that a third of society may be problem drinkers and never broach into the area of an alcoholic, which tends to be maybe 10% of that population. Now, in your particular case, I think you acknowledge that your mother was an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to figure out problem drinker or alcoholic, or does it really even matter?
Okay, so let's talk about that for a little bit. Genetics drive everything, right? Genetics really drive, a lot. So your genetics determine your skin color, your eye color, whether you're going to have a receding hairline, if you're going to go prematurely gray. It even determines certain cancers, right? So if your mom has breast cancer, you're going to be tested more often for breast cancer because genetically, your colon cancer is the same way, diabetes, high cholesterol, right? You could be the fittest. You could work out all day long, but you may have a genetic predisposition towards high cholesterol. I think we all understand that. What people don't seem to understand is that also applies to things like mental health issues. Schizophrenia, for example, is genetically transmuted. Addiction. And notice I didn't say alcoholism. I said addiction. That's an important thing to understand. Addiction is genetically transmuted as well. Now, when you have this genetic mutation for addiction, and you are then genetically predisposed to not process alcohol like non-alcoholics process alcohol. And that's the key differentiation right there. Okay, so when we talk about a problem drinker, is it possible for you that alcohol is a problem in your life and not be alcoholic? Yes, because genetically you're not predisposed towards that. Now, what are we talking about? We've probably all known people that have gone through like a dark period, maybe a divorce, maybe a death, maybe a loss of a job, whatever, name it. And somebody just goes into this dark period and they're like, my solution to that is to just drink. But for those people, when they kind of come out of that period, and I could list, probably 20 examples of people that I know that fit this category, that once they get through that period and they get back on track and they find their purpose and they find their center, they get back on track and either don't have a problem drinking anymore or don't drink at all. Okay? That is very different than what we're talking about. What we're talking about is this is not a dark period. This is a problem, meaning your body does not process alcohol like other people. And the messages in your brain, and without getting all into the science behind this, but the way I describe it is this. Your body's designed to survive, is it not? If you're hot, you sweat. If you're cold, you shiver. If you're hungry, you eat. We have the sexual urge to propagate the human race so we don't go extinct. All survival mechanisms. And your body will recognize things that are damaging and poisonous to it. So let's say you go out to the Chinese buffet or the buffet and you look at the fish that's been sitting out for 4 days and you go, hey, I'll have all of that. And then you eat it and 20 minutes later you realize, hey, eating all that fish was probably not a good idea. And your body goes, hey, this was spoiled fish. We got to get rid of it. This is bad. We got to get rid of it. Your body stops. First of all, you're going to stop and you're going to throw up, and you might even have diarrhea because diarrhea is the body's natural. That's a cleansing process. Your body, but you don't think about that. It's like a parasympathetic response. You don't think about that. When you get diarrhea, you have no control over that, do you? So for those of you that think you have a ton of willpower and you feel like you can willpower anything, think about the last time you had diarrhea. Could you willpower that to stop? Yeah, I don't think so. But that's what happens. It's your body's natural reaction for survival. Now, alcohol is a poison to every cell of your body. Your body should reject it. That's why the people that are not alcoholic, like you, can have 1 or 2 beers and you're like, okay, I'm done. Or if you have too many, maybe 3 beers, you're like, I feel like I'm losing control. I don't like that. I don't like the tingly feeling. You don't like the feeling.
Even problem drinkers can be heavy drinkers, though, Mike. They can build up a tolerance.
Just hear me out on this.
Okay.
Okay, because I'm driving to a point. You will stop because your brain has said, bad, poison, stop. That is not the signal that an alcoholic gets, and this is through a genetic mutation. Where you get the tingly feeling and the uncomfortable feeling, that's your body's way of saying, stop, not good for us. My brain sends the exact opposite signal. It says, not only is this not a poison, not only is this not bad, this is necessary for survival. And if your body recognizes it for survival, it will want more. And well, how much more? As much as it can get. And that's why we drink enormous amounts of alcohol and get up and go to work the next day. You'd be in the hospital if you drank.
But Mike, I've never been a problem drinker. So you saying that even a problem drinker who has built up tolerance, they're still not processing the alcohol like an alcoholic would.
It's still processed differently. And the reason why I'm saying that is because at a certain point, they can stop. And that's going to be the key differentiation. And we can get into the DSM-5. We can get into all the criteria. It's not really necessary because here's what you really need to understand. If you're listening to me right now, here's what you really need to understand. You can take the test and you can look at the DSM-5. You can do all that. But the question is, once you start drinking, can you stop? Can you stop? in your life. If you've gotten to the point where you're losing your marriage or you're losing your career, you've had several DUIs, you've been arrested, you don't have a social life, you don't have hobbies, whatever. I'll even say this. If anyone has even talked to you about your drinking, you might want to listen to what we're talking about and ask yourself whether you're in one of these categories. Because here's an important thing, very simplistic type of thing. Normal social drinkers, people that do not have an alcohol problem, do not have people talk to them about their alcohol use. Let me ask you, has anybody ever sat down to talk to you about your alcohol use?
No, but cannot a problem drinker who's not an alcoholic have families complaining to them that they're not problem drinkers?
Yes. Yes, you can. Okay, because let's say this. A problem drinker is somebody that is abusing alcohol, but they are not alcoholic. Okay, and people you can think of examples like this. Do we have? I see where you see a lot of this is like in college, right? What happens? A young kid graduates, 18 years old. They're living at home, and then all of a sudden they go off to college, and you're not. Mom and dad aren't there. You're kind of sowing your oats a little bit, spreading your wings a little bit, and you're maybe going to the fraternity party, you're going to the football games, you're doing those things. Can you drink problematically? Absolutely. Why? Because everybody else is doing it. You're not at home. You would never be able to do this home. And that's just kind of, for a lot of people, it's like a rite of passage. Can that create problems for you? Absolutely. Can you get a DUI? Absolutely. Will it prevent you from going to class? Affect your grades? Absolutely. Will create health issues. Look, I have known people that are not alcoholic that went to college, but because they were sowing the oats, drank so much, they created permanent, lifelong damage to their bodies. They're not alcoholic, but they went through that period. But when they went through that, they stopped. That's not what we're talking about with alcoholism, okay? Maybe you're the guy, you and I knew people in the Navy that drank heavy. That's what you do in the Navy. That's what you do in a squadron. They got out of the Navy, went into other careers, probably never drank again. They're not alcoholic. That's not what we're talking about. These are very different things. So people drink for different reasons, okay? Now, if you're but this situation where people come and talk to you, can you be the college kid who's not alcoholic, but you're sowing your oats, but your grades are, floundering, and mom and dad or a counselor or somebody at the school come up, hey, Lillie, you need to get your act together. We're going to kick you out of here. You can't drink every day. You need to go to class. Can that happen? Yeah. So then somebody talks to you, and that's a problem, but you stop. That's one category. It's not what we're talking about. So let me
ask you the other question. Like I asked you earlier, and you said it was progressive. So you just define an alcoholic as someone that once they start, they can't stop. Mm-hmm. And their body is processing it differently. So in your particular case, when did you start to notice, I drink? I might be drinking problematically, right? Mm-hmm. Because now you have a lifetime of many years of resentment. So you're drinking over the resentment. Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, because your body is processing it differently, when did you start noticing, I'm not processing this stuff where it's either I'm out or it's out? It had to have occurred at some point where you're noticing it. So I think
where the realization for me came when it gets worse and worse and worse over time. We're married, we have kids, moving in my career, getting promoted in my career. You have more obligations because you're a parent, more obligations at work. And there's a certain point where I started to realize that the things that I wanted to do, because if you remember, I was getting into health and fitness, I was getting into cycling, I was getting into triathlon, and I realized, it was kind of like a dual-minded thing. On one hand, at that point, I was like a fitness fanatic. But on the other hand, I kind of knew that drinking was kind of working against everything I was trying to do. And so, and then it was problems with you. You were giving me a hard time. I'm missing kids' events. I'm not doing things. You're threatening to leave. And so I'm having all of these issues, not to mention health issues, because if you think about it, I was starting to develop health issues I'd never had before. And it was pretty clearly related to my drinking. So then I'm like, well, I need to stop. There was a point where I was like, I need to stop. That's when I realized it, because then I realized I want to do this. And in the listeners, you need to ask yourself, do you want to stop? If you don't want to stop, there's really nothing anybody can do for you. But if you want to stop but can't stop, then that's like the tipping point right there. And that's the demarcation point. And that's when you like, if you're asking yourself, am I an alcoholic or a problem drinker? Because it's interesting. You recently asked me a question because you've been working with somebody that mentioned to you, like, how do you know the difference between a problem drinker and an alcoholic? But the interesting thing about this individual is their loved one is having lots of life consequences and lots of pretty serious health consequences and still will not stop. But you're asking, is this a problem drinker or an alcoholic? The question, at that point, it is, you're having all of these problems. You know it. Everybody in your world knows it, and you're still not going to stop. I don't even need to meet with this person to know that they have alcohol use disorder, severe, right, which is the DSM-5 diagnosis, right? With those consequences, of course, if you want to stop and you can't, that's it right there. And that's where I was. I knew that I couldn't stop.
So even though there were many times that I would say, we could be in Hawaii, you could be retired, and life could be perfect, and you'd still be drinking.
Yeah.
That was me saying that very early on. But because of the fact that it doesn't matter what I say, it's only if you say it to yourself.
Right.
And you've convinced yourself, because you'd always say, I could stop whenever I want to. I made it through deployments, like you said. So there was nothing to force you to actually look in the mirror to say, okay, I really, really want to stop. Oh, I can't. So even though I would be complaining about it, it really fell on deaf ears because you had not applied that to yourself.
Right.
And so it was only when you applied it to yourself that you realized, I really want to stop and I can't.
Well, I think what happened was during the period that you're talking about, and many of the people listening will understand this, that I did not understand the disease of addiction. At that time, it was looked at by me and by everybody, to include you too, really, if you think about it. It was a moral issue. You're drinking. Why aren't you stronger with this? You're drinking. Why do you not love me? If you loved the kids more, you wouldn't do this. If you loved me more, you wouldn't do this. If you loved God more, we're going to church. You and I were going to church. We're religious people, right? Why are you putting alcohol before God? Are you not a Christian man? These are the things that I was hearing. And I didn't understand that because I do love my kids. I do love you. I do love God. I wanted to be healthy. I was a responsible guy. I was in what is considered a very responsible job with a clearance. I was all those things. I now know that alcoholism and being a responsible, good, loving person have nothing to do with one another. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous says that what we have is an allergy towards alcohol. And you think, oh, come on, Mike, it's not an allergy. Well, Webster's dictionary defines an allergy as the body having an abnormal reaction to a substance. That's the definition of an allergy. And that's certainly true of alcohol. I was having an abnormal reaction towards alcohol because the normal reaction to alcohol is that your body should reject it because it's a poison. My body wasn't doing that. Abnormal reaction, my body was craving. And by the way, cravings and obsession to alcohol is unique to alcoholics. If you're not alcoholic, you do not have craving and you do not have the obsession. That's a key distinction. Do you obsess over alcohol? Do you crave alcohol? Non-alcoholics do not crave alcohol. Key distinction. So I didn't know the I didn't know the science behind it. I was really wrapped up in the moral side of it. This is, you're a good person, you're a bad person, you're a strong person, you're a weak person. It wasn't until much later I went to a treatment center and I heard for the first time from a counselor that was there. And it was interesting because I actually didn't even like this counselor. I didn't even like the guy. But the one thing that he did was he beat into our heads the disease model and talked about the genetics, talked about the predisposition, and said, you have no control over this. And it's silly to say that this is a moral issue. And he used the example. Here in Virginia, I'll give you an example. Here in Virginia, things bloom in the spring. I have all kinds of allergies. I sneeze, I snot. I have all of these reactions to the things that bloom. And imagine that you were to come up to me and say, you know, Mike, you know why you sneeze and you have all these reactions? It's because you don't go to church enough. You don't go to the gym enough. You don't love your wife. You don't love your kids. And I would look at you and go, huh? What does that have to do with my nose running? And the answer is absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. The truth is, I have a reaction to whatever's blowing in the wind, whatever pollen that's going out there. And that's the way alcohol is. Alcohol has nothing to do with being a good person, religious person, loving or not. My body reacts to it. So how do you not react to an allergen? You don't engage with the allergen. So if you're allergic to peanuts, you don't eat peanuts. If you're allergic to shellfish, you don't eat shellfish. If you're an alcoholic, you don't drink alcohol. It's that simple. And for those of you that are struggling, the simpler you keep this, the sooner you're going to get well. Because if you notice, it was around that time, and it wasn't easy, but that was the beginning on the run of recovery that I'm in right now. If you think about it, once I had that sort of paradigm shift established in my mind, that was the beginning, really, if you think about it.
So we approached the subject as far as problem drinker versus alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
A problem drinker, no matter how heavy they may drink, they're still processing it like a non-alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas an alcoholic, because they have this allergy, that makes a very distinguished line between the two, problem drinker versus alcoholic. An alcoholic just simply has an allergy and doesn't process the alcohol like a teetotaler versus a problem drinker.
And they have the obsession.
Yes, and that's another.
And they have the craving.
The craving. So a problem drinker won't crave to the level of degree as an alcoholic.
They may not crave at all.
Oh,
like,
okay.
for example, I go to a frat party, and let's say I'm right. Again, to give you an example, I'm a college kid. I come out. I go to university, and I'm pledging a fraternity, and they make me drink, I don't really want to drink. I don't really do this. I haven't done it. May never do it again, but I'm trying to make these guys happy. So I drink enormous amounts of alcohol. Maybe I go to the hospital. They have to pump my stomach. Maybe I ruin my kidneys. I've known people that's happened to. Maybe I drove home that night and I got a DUI. Is that creating enormous amounts of problems in my life? Absolutely. All right. Is that a problem? Yeah. Can I be a problem drinker while in college? Sure. Why? Because of the peer pressure to do that. You know, college kids will do things that they don't necessarily want to do to fit in. That's part of us wanting to please other people. That does not mean they're alcoholic, though. That is entirely different than what we're talking about. I wasn't drinking because people were pressuring me to drink. I was drinking because my brain was telling me I had to. You upset. It becomes your God. It tells you what to do. Alcohol owned me. Alcohol controlled me. I didn't control alcohol. Does it make sense? And that's really what it comes down to. Can you control it? Meaning, if your wife is pregnant, has a baby, and your wife says, I want you to stop drinking because you need to take care of this child. Or your boss says, hey, we're going on a trip, and it's very important. Nobody's drinking on this trip. Can you do that? Hey, I'm going to go run a marathon, and so I'm going to train, and I'm going to take my training seriously, so I'm going to stop drinking. Can you do that? If the answer is yes, that's a very different category than me. I would train and drink. You know that. There were times when I drank and showed up at the starting line for a marathon still drunk. That's a very different category there. Very different category.
So, Mike, I want to bring in the family. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, it's the frog in the water. You're not a problem drinker. You're an alcoholic. But it took you a while because you're the frog in the water to recognize that you're an alcoholic. And like I mentioned, lots of times the family members know about it well ahead than you do. And so I want to move into the direction of how can a family member best help an alcoholic who may not even consider themselves an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
So I know what I did. I did many things that I'm not proud of. But instead of going through what are the things that I did that was wrong, from your perspective, looking back, not that it would have made any difference at all, but how can a family member, we have family members that are there who are watching this program because they love their loved one, but they suffer from alcoholism or drug addiction.
Mm-hmm.
What would be the best thing that you can see family members supporting their loved one?
So, and by the way, I don't want you to beat yourself up because you knew what you knew. I knew what I knew. I described here on this program tonight, there were lots of things that I didn't know then that I know now. We can always look back. Hindsight is 20/20. Oh, I should have done this. I should have done that. Well, really, but did you know then what you know now? Of course we would do things differently now, but we didn't know. We grew. And I also am a firm believer that you have to go through what you have to go through to be where you are, right? So there were a lot of things that you did right. And I'm going to start with a few things that you did right. You stood strong. You did not back down. You did not enable in any way, really. You learned that, and I think that as I was learning about addiction, you were learning. Actually, you were probably ahead of me in learning about addiction because you were involved in Al-Anon before I was in AA and going to conferences. I mean, you were really involved way before I was. So you did a lot of things that were right. So I don't look at this as what did you do wrong. I think it's more appropriate to say, let's discuss what you learned along the way, right? And learning from that, what can other people glean from what we learned and what you learned so they don't have to take 10, 15 years to learn the same thing. Because you guys do have to understand, if you're listening to this, that you can end the suffering, particularly if you're the alcoholic, that you really, this is my advice to you. Take what we're telling you and take it as the truth. Because what's going to happen is you're going to suffer if you get sober down the road. It's going to be because you've come to the conclusion that what we're telling you is correct, but you went through 10 to 15 years trying to prove us wrong just to prove that we were correct, when you could have just gotten those 10 to 15, been sober those 10 or 15 years, if that makes sense. Because I will tell you, the concepts that I was told the first day I went into AA didn't change. It was just when I finally got sober, I started following the things that I had heard and then had that run. So in other words, I could have had about another decade of sobriety under my belt, but I didn't because I had to go out and be stubborn and learn the hard way just to learn that, hey, these guys were onto something in the first place. But to your question, what do you do if you are the person that is suffering and your loved one is struggling? What do you do? What do I recommend that you do? One, learn about the disease. Watching this podcast is a start, but listen to other podcasts. Read as much literature as you can. And always, always, always point to the solution. Always point to the solution. This is a problem. The proof that it's a problem is I'm talking to you and I'm telling you it's a problem. If your spouse is telling you that this is a problem, then it's a problem. If your employer is telling you it's a problem, it is a problem. Okay? If you want to continue to be employed there. Keep pointing to the solution. And then not creating. So here's the one thing that you did that I don't recommend that people do. Now, I understand why you did, and I'm not being critical, because, again, we know, because I think you support me on this as well. Your loved one will hit a bottom. They will hit it. They will hit it. it is not your job to make that bottom happen. I think what happens is you do not enable behavior, you do not support the behavior, you do not fund the behavior. And if you have to leave the home for your safety or the safety of children, then you do that. I'm not saying you have to get divorced. I'm saying you do not have to be in that environment. Because if your loved one will not get the simple message of recovery, and it is a simple message, if they are not going to get that, then they have, in essence, abandoned you. And so I would step away. Again, doesn't mean that you get divorced, but I would step away. I would protect the children. I would protect myself and let the consequences be what they may. And then when the subject comes up, you're pointing to this, hey, to your loved one, there's a solution. It's over there. It's a very simple solution, but you need to follow that solution, and you need to do that if we're going to be back together, because you're going to die from this disease. You do not have a right, and you used to say that to me, you do not have a right to make me sit and watch you destroy yourself. We are our family. We are moving along. We're moving along in life. You have chosen to check out, but we're moving along. Now, when you want to get back on the train with us, we're going to welcome you back. But you need to understand that while you're drinking, while you're drugging, whatever you're doing, you've checked out of life. We're moving on. And if you have children, I have a responsibility to these children. You're absolving yourself of that responsibility, but I have a responsibility to them. But there's the solution over there, and go get it. And never back down off of that. That's what I think. But do not enable. And I'll tell you, it is really hard to work with family members, particularly like mothers and fathers. Mothers are the worst because it is like, well, I can't put my son on the street, my daughter on the street. Well, what are they going to do without me? Okay, well, your solution is to contribute to them killing themselves in the basement or the bedroom. I'm not saying this is easy. It's not easy. I understand that. But as long as you... I mentioned not creating bottoms, but on the other hand, don't prevent the bottom either. So don't prevent it and don't cause it. Just let it happen. But what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's really good. I think that from what I heard you say is, if you have a loved one who's suffering from addiction, whether it's alcoholism or drugs, it's very important for the family member, as you mentioned, to learn about the disease. I would also offer, whether it's some sort of support group, right? In my particular case, it's Al-Anon. It could be Nar-Anon. It can be, I saw a professional counselor who had a background of Al-Anon under their belt. That was extremely helpful for me because it took you, I went to my first Al-Anon meeting in 2004. You didn't get sober until 2012. Mm-hmm. So that's 8 years of trying to learn about this disease and then being with a support group that could help me, short of leaving you, to be able to even stay in the marriage because they kept me grounded in recognizing that you had a disease. So that was very, very helpful for me. And so anyone, any person who has a loved one that's suffering, the education, a support group, a professional counselor, I cannot recommend that enough.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? And it's your choice whether or not you choose to stay in that environment. I do
think it's important to have a counselor that understands addiction.
Absolutely.
Because I will tell you, the vast majority of don't. Now, in whatever area you live in, you can find out. But if you go to support groups, a lot of times it's kind of word of mouth. See if there's anybody that is seeing a counselor and seeing specifically an addictions counselor. Do understand, because I did go to counselors that did not understand addiction, and they were not helpful at all. So that's one important caveat to that. Counselors and doctors and counselors are not all the same. You need to have somebody that understands addiction. It's very, very important. Not everybody does.
So that's the perspective from the family member. Mike, what if there's someone who's out there who's the addict, right? The alcoholic or the addict, and they are like, you know what? I think I have a problem. what are they supposed to do? What would you recommend that they do? Because like you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, there are certain steps that you want them to take, certainly, but I mean.
Well, I think it starts with an open mind. For God's sake, have an open mind. Look, I work in a detox center, and we see some of the same patients over and over and over and over again. And the thing is that many of these patients know recovery. They actually understand recovery, and they understand the disease, but yet they keep coming back to the unit. And I think there's a difference between knowing what to do and doing it. And a lot of it is just this stubborn. We alcoholics and addicts are inherently stubborn, very just stubborn people. You're not going to tell me what. And I think there's a certain element of defiance to it. I really do. And, you're not going to tell me what to do. And you're not going to tell an addict what to do by getting in your loved one's face and saying, I'm going to take the kids. I'm going to go, you're going to have to move into an apartment. You're going to have to do that. The disease is telling them that that's okay. I hear people to say that all the time. When my wife told me she was leaving or that I had to leave the house, great. That meant I was free to drink as much as I wanted. It's insane. Like, dude, you got 3 kids. You got a career. What are you doing? But that's the disease. That's you got to look at addiction as almost like malware on a computer, where malware goes on a computer and just takes over the computer and makes it do things you don't want to do. That's what addiction does to an addict's brain. It makes you do crazy things that if you weren't using, you go, that's pretty crazy. But it takes over the brain. So I think the first thing, if you want to get well, is make a decision. You make that decision that you want to get well. Now, you think, well, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Don't the people that come to your unit, don't they all want to get well? Actually, no. They might voice to you that they want to get well. Really, when you think about it, most addicts don't want to stop using. They just want to stop the consequences of their using. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. They don't want to stop using. I just don't want all these bad things that keep happening to me. I still want to drink but not get a DUI or lose my job or have conflict at home. They don't really want the drinking to stop. But what you're going to have to get in your mind is that that's not going to stop. The drinking has to stop. So first and foremost, you make that decision that you want to get well. Then the next thing is have an open mind and start listening to the people that know what they're talking about. And I know when people aren't ready, because many of the people that don't get well think they know a lot more than they do. Like, I love people that come to, and I'm saying that in a sarcastic way, people that come to our unit and will start debating me on various recovery programs. Let's use AA for example. I don't like AA, Mike. It doesn't work for me. Okay, but then you start talking to them and you realize they really have no experience about this. They don't know the first thing about the program. They don't know the steps. They don't know the history. They don't know how it works, but yet they've decided that it doesn't work for them. We call it condemnation prior to thorough investigation. You condemn something that you know nothing about. It's like me telling you to not go see a movie because it sucks, but then you find out I've never actually seen the movie, but I told you that it sucked. That's kind of what people do here. What were you going to say?
Well, what I was going to say is lots of times in AA, and set aside AA, but I mean just the concepts, that before you make that decision, don't you have to accept first that it's a disease?
Yes. Yep.
So the people who are defiant, who you're saying that they're stubborn in what respect? Because in my mind, I have to accept that I have a disease, that I have an allergy towards alcohol. My body doesn't process it normally. I have an allergy which causes me to crave it, which is weird, right? Because it's diametrically
really
opposite.
Not weird.
Well, no.
It's a genetic mutation.
It's
like the light switch over here.
Right.
It's like the light switch. If we wired it wrong, where off is on and on is off, right? Mm-hmm. It's actually not weird. It's just explained with the electrician wired it opposite of what it should be.
Okay, so let's take that
That's
concept.
what we have.
So let's take the concept. What's on is off, and what's off is on. So you have to accept the fact that it's miswired.
Yeah, but you can't bring in anybody to fix it.
Yes.
That's the difference.
Okay, so we're going to take that part, but then the decision is, hey, I know that my brain is miswiring. My decision has to be, I just can't drink.
Correct.
I can never drink like a normal person.
Correct.
So the only
Do you
way...
want, you want to know what the
Right.
dirty little secret to
Well, no,
addiction
wait.
is? No, here's the dirty
Right.
little... No, here it is. Here's the dirty little secret, right? You know what all this boils down to? You just said it. You can't drink. It's not complicated. We don't pick up a drink because that will flip the switch to on. Or when you thought you were turning it off, you actually turned it on. You're not changing it. What does that mean? What are you left with? You can't drink.
Right. So you, in the past, have talked about don't get in the ring with Mike Tyson. But in reality, what you're saying is you, as an alcoholic, can never drink safely.
Correct.
So because we talked about in some other countries, they talk about where they don't believe in abstinence. But if you're a true alcoholic and you can't drink safely, you have no choice. You
Correct.
cannot drink.
Correct.
Period.
We have a saying. If you could have drank normally like other people, you would have already done that. You would have already done that. But we have proven to ourselves, and if you're listening to this and you're in this category, you've proven that you don't drink like other people. You know you don't drink like other people. That's why you drink in private. You do know this, right? Non-alcoholics never have anybody talk to them about their drinking. You know that, right? You need to ask yourself, have you ever hidden bottles? Do you know that non-alcoholics never do that?
Problem drinkers don't do that?
Nope. Do you lie about your drinking? Normal social drinkers never lie about their drinking. Why would they? Do you ever lie about your drinking? No. Why would you? It wouldn't occur to you to do that. We do that all the time. So if somebody's talking to you, you hide things and you lie, you might want to really think about what we're saying here today. Think about it. That means that you've crossed that line. The bottom line, guys, is if you have gotten to the point where you're even having the discussion we're talking about with someone else, it's a problem for you. And it will continue. But here's the thing. It will continue to be a problem for you, only it will get worse over a period of time. But here's the good news. Now, because I don't want you to be depressed about anything we're saying here today. There is hope. There is a solution. But you're going to have to open your mind to the solution. At the end of this, it's going to mean that you don't drink or drug ever again. And you're thinking, well, that's not possible. It actually is possible. I'm living proof that it's possible. Now, you might say, Mike, you don't understand my problems. You don't understand this person died in my life, or I don't like my boss, or I'm under this stress. I've been sexually abused. I've been physically abused. Mike, you could never possibly understand what I'm going through. You don't know that, right? When you're talking to people, you don't know what other people have been through. Okay? Your life is not any more or less traumatic than mine. It's just different than mine. Okay? And we all respond to trauma differently. But here's what I do know, that your drinking or drugging is not helping whatever that is. Whatever that is, whatever trauma you've been through, you're going to need help, professional help for that. Your drinking and drugging is going to prevent that from happening. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Is that why you always say that before you can resolve those other issues, like if you were sexually molested or you're a rape victim, or you lost a loved one, you've got to stop the drinking and the drugging so that you're of sound mind to be able to address all these other bigger issues.
Correct.
It gets in the way.
It absolutely gets in the way. It almost prevents it. And many counselors won't work with you if they know that you're using. And by the way, and my pet peeve also, and it's another discussion for another time, is that includes marijuana, folks. Marijuana is not helping you. It is not. But we'll talk about that another time. Yeah.
So I think my final question to you is, well, you've been in recovery for a while, right? So for 13 years. And so we talked a lot about the beginnings of problem drinkers versus alcoholics, how family members can help their loved one. Now, for those who've been in long-term recovery, like in our particular case, what are the things, and I'm thinking more from a couple's perspective, setting those boundaries, and then also just where do we go from here? Where do we go from here as far as supporting one another, creating that healthy environment between the two of us? Because you still have a deadly disease.
Mm-hmm.
It's in remission, I would call it. So how do we stay strong as a couple to support each other as you're in remission right now?
Well, I think what's important is you understand. I've been blessed in the fact that you have really taken the time to understand this. And you are supportive of this. Unfortunately, many people in recovery, their families have long gone. The damage was just too great. It was too deep that they've lost the support of their loved ones. That's actually more common than what our situation is. Where possible, help that. So support one another. And I think that it's important for us to recognize the warning signs, because I think that you're pretty good about that. You know when I'm under stress. You know when to back off from me. Without going into the details of it, but over the last 3 years, I've been involved. I've been working 10 hours a day in a hospital, pretty high stress environment. Then I was involved in some other very high profile public things, very, very stressful. You put them, it was an enormous amount of stress, which is very dangerous for somebody that is in that is in recovery. But you recognize that. And I think that you were very good during the last 3 years when I was under that, a lot of stress that would break most people if you think anybody. But when you're an addict, it could really, really create problems. And I think that you were really good at where you could, encouraging me to take care of myself. Sleep, you're huge on sleep. Those of you that watching this right now, she's really into blackout curtains and making like we live in a cave now. But what really helps. But the point is that you're Miss Self-Help. You are the queen of self-help. And where I've benefited from that is you recognize when I'm under stress, sleep deprived, not taking care of myself, not doing sleep hygiene, things like that. You're always good at kind of ushering me back into, hey, don't forget about this, don't forget about that. We should do this, let's do that. You and I are both on a sort of a fitness campaign again, kind of like over these last 3 years doing what I've been doing. Physical health has kind of gone off on the wayside. But what I like about you is that you, instead of you saying, hey, you should do this, you're very good about saying, why don't we do this, right? And then so that it becomes sort of that team effort. And so I think that that's something that if you're listening to this and you are that loved one that has someone, try not to make it, I'm pointing the finger at somebody, but support, understand, and kind of live that, sort of model that to your loved one, because it's mind, body, spirit. And you're really good at that too, is don't forget the spiritual side of life. You're always thinking about spirit. You're always sending me spiritual things to think about. The body we talked about, taking care of yourself, and then the mind. Constantly educating yourself, constantly learning more. Listening to this podcast is something that you're learning as you go on. And again, look at other materials too. Constantly learning about this, because we know, you and I both know so much more today than we did 10, 15, 20 years ago. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, and I agree with you, because I think we mentioned it before, where because the disease of alcoholism will always exist there, instead of saying you are your disease,
mm-hmm.
and locking and letting that be your entire identity,
mm-hmm.
you are Mike Van Meter,
mm-hmm.
who happens to have the disease of alcoholism.
Right.
So then we take it out of you, we put it right here, And there's a partnership between you and I to say we're going to work together on that disease.
Right.
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 So then when I'm able to find things, or when you might be drifting, then it isn't you, Mike. It's like, hey, maybe we ought to do this, because the relationship, we're very entwined with one another. So when you're negatively affected, it affects me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we call it it's a family disease.
It is a family disease, yeah.
I mean, because we're married.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. And the other thing too, and I guess we can wrap up on this, is I think that once I got into recovery, the both of us became very purpose driven. And one of the things about being in recovery is you start to find your purpose again, in direction again. And that is essential. That is essential to recovery, because at the end of my drinking, I really felt rudderless. It was like I was starting to get to the point where I wasn't seeing a future. I'd stopped progressing as a person on a lot of different levels, not just career-wise. And for a lot of men, the metric that you use is always your profession. But it wasn't just my profession. It was like in everything. And once you get into sobriety, then I think when you open yourself up to, I believe, the calling of God, but the universe, whatever. Look, I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm just saying, but when you open yourself up to those influences and you listen, and you're like, why am I here? What should I be doing? What is this thing called life all about? I think you need to listen to what your calling is and do it. And then that becomes your mission. And being mission-centered for the rest of your life really helps with your sobriety, but it helps with your family too. And what the advantage that I've had is that you feel that way as well. So we both have gotten sort of into, here's our direction in life, and here's our purpose in life. This podcast is part of that. This is one element of our purpose in trying to help other people. And that's the secret sauce to recovery, is by helping other people. It helps you as much as it helps them. And so everything then becomes focused on outward focus and that outward drive. And then you become busy doing that. And frankly, you don't even have time to think about drinking. You and I don't have the time for me to drink anymore. We're just doing too many things, right? We're too busy. But we're busy helping other people. And that's the key. And I know you're in recovery. I know by the language that you use, when you stop talking about yourself and you start talking about other people, then I know you're moving towards recovery. It's the language that's used.
So, Mike, we covered a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could boil it down to one key point, what is your key takeaway for our episode today?
I think that the key takeaway for this episode is listen to others that have walked this path. Follow the suggestions that they give you. This is something that I've seen in recovery over and over and over. You're going to hear from the world that there are many paths to recovery. There is one path to recovery, and that is driving towards complete and total abstinence. Now, that seems overly simplistic, but the tools of the trade that people that have gotten into long-term recovery are remarkably similar with each person that you will meet. Very, very simple. Keep this simple. Stay direct. Stay in focus. And always understand that there is this solution, and follow that solution. But go to people that have done this before, and just do what they did for about a year. Just give it a year. Now, I guarantee you at the end of that year, you're going to go, hey, my life's a lot better. But that's what I did. I will tell you that was at the end, my recovery. I found an individual that I trusted, and I said, I'm going to do whatever this guy tells me to do for 1 year, no matter how stupid I thought it was, and then reevaluate after a year. That would be my suggestion.
Okay.
And that's the key takeaway. How about you?
Well, I really like the way you described very succinctly the difference between a problem drinker and an alcoholic. And so hopefully for our listeners, that really helps clear it up. and a myriad of other topics and questions and Q&A kind of thing that we did. So, Mike, I want to thank you, and we will see all of you at our next episode.
All right.
Thanks
Take
for
care.
joining
Thank
us.
you. So as I always like to say, I do not represent any group, do not represent anyone other than myself. My only purpose in giving this information is to share with you what I've done because it's helped me and maybe it will help you too. If I've said something that does not apply to you or you don't agree with, then just discard it. But try to take any information that you can use for yourself and help others as well. That's what we do in recovery. We help ourselves along the way, and we hope to impart the knowledge we have gained to others as well. With that, please visit our Facebook page, Recovery is Possible, and our website, VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com. Let us know how we're doing, and let us know if there's any topic that you're interested in hearing about. We'd love to hear from you, and take care, and we'll see you next time.